Om Sahanavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryankarvavahe Tejasvinavadidhamastu Mavidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, so let's just get straight into the questions that came through for this week. This reference is from Hamlet. It's the advice that Polonius gives to his son Laertes, as Laertes is going back to France to continue his studies. So the quote is, "Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of these." Try again. "Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee." Please elaborate on the reference. Okay. So the idea of beware of entrance into a quarrel, that's fairly self-explanatory. Don't get unnecessarily involved in any kind of conflict or confrontation. Beware of it. Now, the point that the quote is making is that sometimes it is necessary. Now, the idea of getting into a quarrel, this is something that itself has a huge spectrum. Getting into a quarrel could be a simple matter of making a single statement that sets a boundary down, that makes a request of somebody, through to an argument and through to physical altercation. So the point of it being necessary is that you are establishing a boundary that needs to be established, or that perhaps has been established but has been transgressed and needs to be reaffirmed. So sometimes it is necessary to re-establish or to establish these boundaries, and that means that you're going to be getting into conflict or confrontation with somebody. So it's an unavoidable thing. If it is unavoidable, if it is necessary, how should you proceed? Well, the advice is, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Your opponent should know that you are serious. And the word opponent there is in inverted commas, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's any kind of enemy or adversary. It could be your child you're dealing with, could be your spouse, your parent, best friend, sibling, work colleague, boss, it could be a group of people, and so on and so forth. It could be a complete stranger. It simply means the person with whom you're interacting. So don't take opposed to be too literal. Your opponent should know that you are serious. They should be taking you seriously. Now, how do you do that? That's what he says. You conduct yourself in a way that your opponent knows you're serious, and inwardly you know you are serious. So it's saying don't be timid about it. Don't go into something half-hearted. If you go in with your own confidence in your position undermined, that's how you will proceed. That's the impression you will make. It's important to remember that when he says beware of entrance to a quarrel, at the point that we're talking, you know it's necessary. You're not doing this to satisfy or to serve the ego. The idea here then is that you should have the convictions of your own cause. You should know, both mind and intellect, that confluence, that the reason you're getting into this conflict is because it is a necessary thing to serve some higher purpose. Best example of this whole quote is in the Bhagavad Gita. So I won't go into all of the details. There's some great resources online that can explain to you the lead up to the Mahabharata war. But the idea is that you have the virtuous cousins Arjuna and his brothers, in conflict with the vicious Kaurava clan. So Arjuna and his brothers try to avoid the war at all costs. They do everything they can. Diplomacy has failed. So Arjuna and his brothers, the Pandavas, they are the righteous rulers, yet they have been exiled from the kingdom. And in the meantime, the rulers that are there are leading the kingdom into destruction, moral, material. So they had to fight the war to reclaim their rightful position on the throne, to save the kingdom. After diplomacy had failed, beware of entrance to a quarrel. Okay, try diplomacy. But being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Once you start the war, you're in a war. Now, that's actually the opposite of what Arjuna started off doing. The whole Bhagavad Gita begins with him lacking the conviction of his cause. I don't know what I should do. I should not fight. These are my cousins, my uncles, my teachers. He lacked that conviction of his cause. He wasn't just timid or half-hearted. He actually collapsed. After having his confusion and his fear and his anxiety cleared through his conversation with Krishna, he recognized, if you like this quote, that this was a righteous war. This was a necessary task to re-establish righteousness. And this is what I touched on earlier with the idea of a higher purpose. In this case, it was to serve the people. So this idea of righteous war implies that there is a legitimate reason, that there is courage, and that he has the strength of his own convictions. Intellect understands the necessity and that it's his obligation. And the mind plays its part by going along, by surrendering to that higher ideal. So elaborate on the reference. Bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Just that idea. When it's necessary, do it like you do anything else, wholeheartedly. Okay, any questions or queries to that? Okay, next question we had come through was from the Vedanta Treatise, chapter 3, do not abuse the plan of nature. Please explain the reference. Okay, so let's look at the reference in a bit more detail. So he says in and around this particular quote, how can this ever-changing world cater to individual demands? Yet you expect in vain for the world to fit into your mental pattern. The world is sometimes cruel only to be kind. Realize that. Do not abuse the plan of nature. Do not fall a prey to cynicism or pessimism in life. Instead, look at the world constructively. Observe the play of pleasure and pain to become introvert, using these contrasting experiences to delve deep into your inner personality. Search within and discover the seat of true peace and happiness. Okay, so what's it saying here? The nature of human beings, the nature of the mind, is that we do expect the world to fit into our mental pattern. You can call it a failing, or you can call it just a natural part of being human. In fact, you could do an analysis and look at the positive sides of this tendency. One of the analyses that we've done a number of times through these classes is that polarity analysis. The idea that every trait, every value, every characteristic has both its positives and its negatives. So you could ask yourself, what would be potential positives of expecting the world to fit into my mental pattern? Okay, I'm not going to go into it here, but there are some very clear downsides to it. Anytime I hold expectations of a person, two things happen. One is simply I will be disappointed. And the second thing is that I'll then place blame and coercion onto that person. So I'm disappointed, so I'm stressed and upset, and the relationship suffers. There is tension, disharmony. And whether that's with a person or an environment or a group of people or your own self, your health or your intelligence or your popularity, whatever it is, this is the nature of human beings. We do expect that the world will conform to what we like, to our own mental pattern. And when it doesn't, it appears cruel to us. He says the world is sometimes cruel only to be kind. Okay. So he says, don't abuse the plan of nature. This idea of a plan of nature does not refer to any kind of predestination. Perhaps another way we can think of the plan of nature is to look at the process of nature or the functioning of nature. We use the example over and over. You cut yourself at heels. How does it know? It's insentient matter, and yet it knows exactly what to do. Do it to a plant, it heals. There's an underlying intelligence. There are forces that come in, and there's a direction. Life takes you towards healing. Same thing is true at the subtle levels of the personality. When we are faced with challenges, the natural tendency of the mind and intellect is to try to solve those challenges in a more productive way. This is the continuous growth urge that we see in human beings. Now, of course, we don't always succeed at that. Sometimes we get it wrong. But we're always looking to solve that challenge, that disparity that we experience between how the world is and how I feel about it compared to what I would like. As a teenager, my mental pattern, my worldview is not yet upgraded or sophisticated enough to deal with complex adult issues. It's getting there, but it's not quite there yet. And so when I'm faced with adult problems, I find it difficult. And so what needs to happen for me to reconcile all of these challenges and all of these disparities? I've got to upgrade my thinking. I've got to see the world from a new perspective. And that dissolves the agitation. It solves the issue. It reconciles it. That urge to upgrade our worldviews is inherent in us. It's part of our makeup. How, why, we don't know. Any more than we know how a plant or our own body heals itself when we cut it. So this idea of a plan of nature, it sounds very mystical in a sense. And there is definitely a mystical element to it. There's a sense of mystery. We don't understand it. And that's really part of the beauty of it. It allows us to enter into that devotional space. But there's also a very clear empirical element to it that we can observe in our own functioning. Now, I'm not saying go cut yourself. You already know that nature finds balance. Nature's moving in the right direction. There's a term you've got to be familiar with, the term paranoia, which is a sense that life or the world or others are seeking to take from you, harm you. But there's another phrase, pronoia, which is the sense that the world is looking to help. That the world, that nature is looking to put opportunities for my happiness in front of me, not opportunities for my downfall. Nature always helps. So there is this direction, there is this functioning of nature. Do not abuse the plan of nature. So every moment that we arrive at is arrived at through nature's functioning. Cause-effect relationships. My choices combined with the external world to create where I am right now. So my choices are one part of the equation, Nature's response is the other part. So to curse my circumstances is to resist, if you like, nature's wisdom, is to resist and reject the way things are. We are saying essentially it ought not to be this way. Now, one thing is to say that's because I made the wrong choices. Okay, now this is what he's referring to when he says, or part of what he's referring to when he says turn introvert. When you say, I am where I am because of some poor choices that I made, you're not cursing nature. You're not abusing the plan of nature. You're not placing blame in the wrong place. You are taking responsibility. And again, it's a fine line between a mature sense of taking responsibility for your choices and for their effects, and self-flagellation, self-blame, unnecessarily coming down on yourself in a way that where you are, in fact, abusing nature in the form of your personality. So the same words can come from different places. But to say, I'm here because of my part in it, okay, you're taking adult responsibility. But what we tend to do is, if we go back to the quote, expect the world to cater to our individual demands. And then when it doesn't, we blame the world. We say there's something wrong with the world. That is to abuse the plan of nature, to curse its circumstances and say it ought not to be this way. Where does that lead us? Okay, it doesn't lead us anywhere. The idea that he's touching on following that is to say that every circumstance that we are in is an opportunity to pause and to reflect. Let's go back to the quote. He says, look at the world constructively. Okay, what does that mean? How do we do it? Observe the play of pleasure and pain within you and see how you fluctuate between joy, sorrow, or pleasure, pain. Look at the contrasting experiences. So it's a matter of self-reflection. What am I experiencing now? What have I been experiencing in the past? Where has it come from? What have been the causes? What have been the triggers? Why do I feel the way I do? What contributes to it? And with that information, so what? Therefore, you conclude something about yourself, about the world, about your behavior, about your choices, and you commit to thinking, feeling, and acting in a way which does serve your well-being. Search within and discover the seat of true peace and happiness. Where does happiness actually lie? And we're confused as to where it sometimes lies. There was an interview I watched a number of years ago with a famous rock musician, and he was talking about his alcoholism. And it started out when he was a youngster that for him, going and drinking with his friends and having a raucous night was exciting. As he got older, he kept on doing it, and it got to a point where starting to drink ended up the exact same way that it always did. Feeling drunk, feeling hungover, making bad choices, and so on and so forth. So why was he getting into it? What is alcohol to him? It's excitement. Question, is it exciting? No, it's not. It's boring. It's the exact same thing every time. So he goes into it for a sense of excitement, but all he gets is boredom. where does happiness actually lie? We're chasing things, looking for whatever our version of happiness is. And once we get there, we often find that place is wanting, because we have expected the world to deliver something it cannot. So when we face challenges and when we face uncomfortable emotions, when we face agitation, when we face disappointment, instead of blaming the world or abusing the plan of nature, what's going on here? Why am I not living my life as freely and happily as I would wish? And what can I do about it? So there is a sense here of surrender, that nature is doing everything it should. Nature knows. Nature understands. I'm a part of nature. Okay, my finger is cut, but it's the whole body which marshals the forces to heal it. My brain and my heart and my other systems don't all say, yeah, it's your cut, it's your problem, you're on your own. No, there is a coherence throughout the whole body. There's an intelligence. Perhaps that extends outside my body and into the rest of nature, and I'm part of it. And that nature knows what it's doing to bring healing to me, perhaps. So there's an element of faith here. So the example of this that we often bring up is that of a prince who goes on a hunt. So he goes on a hunt with his friend, and during the course of that first hunt, he loses his big toe. Now, of course, he's upset, he's angry, he curses his circumstances. And when one of the counselors of the kingdom says, you know, these things happen all by the grace of God, he flies into a rage and throws him into prison. Forgets about the counselor, toe heals, and he goes on a next hunt. During that hunt, he's captured and sacrificed. Sorry, he's captured by a tribe as a sacrifice. So he's held, you know, pre-sacrifice. And the chief comes out to inspect the sacrifices that they're going to make and sees, hang on, this one doesn't have a big toe. It's an imperfect offering, unsuitable. We can't give him to the Lord. Get rid of him. So he's released and he runs back to the palace, falls at the feet of the counselor. I understand what you mean, it's all by the grace of God. He lost a toe and gained a life. So what happens to us? We lose toes. What we don't see is, what are we gaining? Where is that taking us? So nature has this plan, if you like, this direction, and we can get in line with it. Animals can't. Their movement is always in line with that plan of nature. Human beings have the freedom to step outside it. To get in line with the plan of nature means what? It first of all means to recognize this underlying intelligence that pervades nature, and to have a sense of a coherent wisdom that I'm a part of and that's helping to guide my life. It's a feeling. When you have that, you combine it with rational, intellectual reflection. Where am I? What is my life like? How did I get here? What were the external things that pushed me in this direction? What were the internal choices that I made? What have I learned about the world? What do I know about myself? What can I do to take myself towards greater well-being? Nature wants you to be in greater well-being, in the sense that nature wants your cut finger to heal. You can get in line with it, with your heart, with your mind, and with your intellect. Okay, any clarifications? Okay, third question came through. Does one have to become established at the community or country level in order to feel okay when the situation at the family level is turbulent? For example, conflict or a change in structure due to death or some other cause. Okay, so what's this question asking? So what we see here is a circle of identification. What does this mean? You can consider the boundary of each circle to be the boundary of a person's ego. Who are you? Now, it's not answering the question in terms of giving just your name or your status or your position or your background or your race or your ethnicity. It's that sense that you have of being a part of something. It's unnameable. It's not really something you can effectively give words to. But where do you feel the boundary of your own interest, affection, attention lies? So the grossest, most self-centered or egoistic person is established only at the level of oneself. So what that means is that they have no sense of relatedness, connection, communion with anyone except for themselves. Their own demands are primary. Even if a family member's demands are there, they'll overlook them to make sure their own demands are met. As you identify with a larger group, for example, your family, your own egoistic demands now start to fade into the background. You're able to sacrifice your own demands for those or for the benefit of others. And it's not a suppression. It's a very natural thing which makes you feel good, feel okay. And you've all experienced this. You sacrifice something you want to serve the needs of someone within your family. And the word family, of course, can mean your blood relatives, but the idea of family or whānau is more than just your blood relatives. You might call your best friend that you grew up with family. Nonetheless, it's that close-in unit. So when you identify at the level of family, you're able to soft pedal on some of the demands that your individualized personality makes. And again, it's a natural movement of consciousness. It's a natural shifting of your choices. You're not forcing yourself, you're not suppressing yourself. Same thing at the level of the community. Once you're established there, your ego is diminished, it's concentrated, it's spread over a larger area, so therefore less concentrated, if you like. There's no sense of resistance. In the Ishavasya Upanishad that we just finished taking, he talks about this idea that we feel a sense of oneness. There's no resistance, vijugupsa, no disgust, no distaste. But you embrace, you accept. Same thing, look at the way you deal with your family. A family member transgresses somehow, either against you or against the family or against the law or against morality. How do you react? Okay, you might be hurt, might be upset, but that person is still within your embrace. You still accept them. You welcome them in, even with your disappointment, hurt. So as you identify wider and wider, this feeling of oneness, this absence of resistance, this acceptance is afforded to greater and greater and greater number of beings. Your love becomes like a miner's lamp. Wherever you shine it, wherever you turn your head, it's shone on them. And they are the recipient of that openness, that embrace, that acceptance. All beings across all timelines. So beyond all beings, there's no boundary, there's no circle. So self-realization, the state of enlightenment, is beyond all beings. It's the one that doesn't have a circle. So it's an explanation of the phenomenon that is being discussed here. What's the question? Does one have to become established at the community or country level in order to feel okay when the situation at the family level is turbulent? This idea of feeling okay means that you're unaffected. Doesn't mean the absence of certain types of emotions. Again, you may feel sad at another family member's conflict. Okay, two of your close family members are in deep conflict with each other. You feel sad. Naturally, you feel sad. Two people whom you love are in conflict. You're not going to be happy about it or not care. That would be a very strange way to deal with family members whom you claim to love. So the natural human emotion is to feel sad, but that's different from feeling affected. Objectivity is to feel okay, to accept even what is unacceptable. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't act. If you find something unacceptable, you may act to correct it. So you've got these two family members who are in conflict. You do what you can to try and correct it. Doesn't work. At some point you recognize, I can't help. Neither one of them listens to me. So you recognize that even though you'd like to fix it, you can't. So there's still an acceptance of it nonetheless. So where does this objectivity come from? Identifying with higher values. So that's what we're referring to when we talk about this image here of identifying with a wider and wider community. A value is a belief. So to identify with all humanity is to believe I am all of these people. In the same way that you have that sense when it comes to your family. I am these people. They are me. I am them. We are a human being, somebody once said. We are a human being. It's a belief that we are intimately connected. It means I'm established at the level of humanity, and then no matter what anyone does, they're still embraced within my circle of identification. Now, you don't have to be there in order to be unaffected by conflict at the family level. You just have to find objectivity through some other method. So there's a list. By no sense of the imagination is this complete. Just a few ideas. Objectivity comes from identifying with higher values. Circumventing the pathway of your attention from egoistic demands, I want everyone to always get on and be happy, through to higher truths that you know to be true, but perhaps you don't necessarily 100% have as wisdom yet. So you can put effort in to send your attention through that different circuit, circumventing the one which says everyone should always be happy. I don't like it when there's conflict in my family. So it means that you put effort in towards higher values. Where am I a beneficiary? This is a gratitude practice. So we touched on this in some other classes, but it's also important for us to recognize here that something like a gratitude practice can be misused. It can be appropriately used to send your attention away from the expectations of the world fit into my mental pattern and into the thought, well, what do I have? Where am I a beneficiary? I have a family. Okay, it's not perfect, or maybe it is. In any sense, it's not conforming to my likes and dislikes, but I'm part of something. Okay, I'm a beneficiary. but that can be misused. I don't like feeling sad at my family's dysfunction. I don't like the feelings of resentment, disappointment, and anger I have towards my insert person here. And so in order to avoid the unpleasant emotions, rather than dealing with them properly, I invoke a spiritual idea or a spiritual practice to anesthetize myself to them, to distract myself. It's a phrase that we call spiritual bypassing. I use spiritual knowledge or spiritual practice not to circumvent towards something higher, but to avoid what I don't like. Okay, so I won't dwell on that, but that's something we've touched on in the past. But where am I a beneficiary? It connects you to something higher. How can I serve? It's a natural extension of that. When we talk about serving, it's an extending of our own well-being. The moment you ask that question, you're again shifting the attention off what do I want? What am I demanding? Where can I serve? What do others need? Even this shall pass away. Okay, that's one of the poems that we study from the poems book by Theodore Tilton. We recognize that whatever the current conditions are, they're temporary. They'll pass away. If we can have that long game view of things, then current circumstances, current unpleasantness is easier to ride through, knowing that there'll be a change of circumstances down the road. And of course, what can I learn? Anytime we have a growth-oriented goal, that completely changes the way that we view circumstances. So we just touched on this in the previous one. Use the play of pain and pleasure to turn introvert. So including a growth goal in your life plan is essential for developing objectivity. So you can see from these that you don't need to be established at the level of community or country in order to feel okay with family conflict. You just need to find a way to be objective. And in fact, you could argue that to be established at the family level would be sufficient. What does that mean? Because when you're established at the family level, everyone and everything within that is embraced as within you. So there's an acceptance of everything within that boundary. The difficulty in understanding this is that the growth is not necessarily modular. What does that mean? It means that it doesn't, the growth may be modular, which means that where I have that vision of oneness with, say, my country, it has areas where sometimes I slip back and the boundary comes back now to the family level, or it even gets pulled back a little further than that because of specific attachments. So when it comes to dealing with the vast majority of human beings, I'm established at the country level. But when it comes to these few family members, my circle curves back in and sort of dips down below the family level again. So you can see how there might be a lopsided development. Again, this is how attachment functions. It does cause us to function in this way. But the point here in answering the question, do I have to be established at the country level to feel okay with a family level turbulence? No. You can find ways to identify with the higher that keep you objective to that. And as you do that, you are actually moving in that direction as well. So it's practice. Okay. Any questions or clarifications there? Okay, any other questions? Those are the completed ones that we had come through via email. Any other questions that people want to bring up this morning? Okay. No, if not, thank you for the attendance and attention. Thanks for the questions that came through via email. It's always great to get them. They'll be up on YouTube once the live stream has finished and done its processing. So we're back on Sunday, 10:30 a.m. for our Vedanta Treaties class. That's Pacific time. So for those joining, I'll see you then. And for those not, I'll see you next time. Adios.